Hello and welcome back to The Perch from the Wyoming Tribune-Eagle. I'm Noah Zahn, the local government reporter here. This week, we're joined by Hannah Shields, our state government reporter, and a new guest on the show here, Carrie Haderlie, who's a freelance journalist that helps out with us every once in a while and is helping us out with the coverage of the legislative session that's kicked off. We're recording on Tuesday, so it kicked off today, but when the podcast comes out, it'll be the second day of the session. And I have the two of you here today to talk me through some of your top priorities for coverage of this legislative session and what you think are the issues you think would be most important to our readers. Carrie, thanks for joining us. Can we start with you about maybe some of the things you're looking for to cover this?
My name is Carrie Haderlie. I'm a freelance journalist, and I'll be helping out with the Wyoming Tribune-Eagle legislative coverage this session. For the past couple years, I've been following housing issues really closely in Wyoming. There's a lack of affordable housing across the state, and it's particularly challenging in places like Cheyenne, where a lot of workforce housing is lacking. So there are several bills that I will be following to create greater opportunities for funding for affordable housing in Wyoming, and also to maybe reduce some of the regulatory barriers that folks face when they want to create a new development in the state.
And as the local government reporter here, I know that's something that the Cheyenne's Mayor, Patrick Collins, has been very passionate about. Housing, it's particularly affordable housing, is his top priority going into 2025. He's told me several times. Have you chatted with him, or do you have an idea of what maybe Cheyenne's priorities are in those housing discussions?
I have spoken with Mayor Collins, also myself, about affordable housing, and even as far back as, I think, 2023, there was a proposed apartment development out on Ridge Road, and it got put on hold or canceled because of the protest petition process. Neighbors were given the opportunity to voice opposition to that project, which ultimately failed in the city council. And there is a new draft bill being considered that would make the protest process a little bit more difficult, so that neighbors would have to prove a certain amount of harm instead of just an idea of not in my backyard NIMBYism. They didn't want to see that type of development near their house. So there's that one. And then I know that the Cheyenne mayor also supports an expansion of tax increment financing to allow for housing developments to use that kind of funding stream for affordable housing on what may be declared as blighted property. So the mayor has been a champion of that bill, and there are a few others that may come forward. The Wyoming Community Development Authority is recommending that the state seed an affordable housing development fund that communities across Wyoming could access to seed development in their communities, but we shall see where that goes as well.
Sure. Thank you. And now, Hannah, let's jump over to you. What are some of the things that you anticipate being the big issues that you'll be covering in the next month or two?
So there's quite a number of things that we'll be paying attention to that I'll be covering, and also Carrie will also be helping me out with some of this coverage as well. Some of the top priorities that I outlined for us include education. There's quite a number of bills regarding education policies. Many of them are individually sponsored bills, meaning that they are sponsored by a lawmaker instead of a whole committee. Some of these include like a Homeschool Freedom Act. But basically that Homeschool Freedom Act bill would allow parents to start these homeschool education programs and not have to get them okayed by the local school board of trustees. And the representative who's sponsoring that bill told me was to kind of cut out governmental interference in education. One of our own local Cheyenne lawmakers, he's introducing a bill that would create partisan politics in being elected for school board of trustees, which is typically a nonpartisan office, but that could change after this bill. Yeah, so just like quite a few. So that's education, plus looking at education funding. Both the governor and the Joint Appropriations and Education Committees recommended the full $66.3 million cost adjustment for K-12 funding, which would hopefully get the state back on track to funding their public school system. So we'll see if that passes through the governing body successfully. Outside of education, there's also a number of election integrity proposals that would basically make our elections secure and more tighter. Such things include like a proposed ban on ballot drop boxes. We have one here in Laramie County. Another would be proof of U.S. citizenship and Wyoming residence at the voter rolls. So again, just like a number of those that we could be looking out for. And then another big one that would definitely interest Laramie County residents would be there's a couple of different gaming bills that are being proposed during this session. One bill would basically allow local control over approving simulcasting permits. So like for your historic horse racing machines, right now that is only approved at the county level. But this bill would allow city officials to also kind of weigh in on whether or not they approve it. So that could be something that could be approved at the city level instead of at the county level. And then another one would make state federally compliant with HISA. So we could broadcast our horse races.
And can you explain what HISA is?
Okay, so HISA is an acronym for Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Authority. And it's basically a self-regulatory organization for thoroughbred horse racing in the United States. Basically what that means is if your state were to be compliant with HISA, you have to pay some fees to the federal government. So that's kind of what that bill would do. And the lawmakers who are supporting that bill say this could be a really good opportunity for Wyoming to broadcast its own thoroughbred horse racing here, especially when horse racing tracks around the country are dying. So those are the two main bills regarding gaming that I'll be looking at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's something later today I'm going to a meeting about potential expansion down at the Swan Ranch. They want a $76 million expansion there. Mm-hmm. And I've talked with the mayor too, who also says that he wants more local control, city control of those issues.
Hannah and I will also be following pretty closely the discussion of concealed carry firearms, both in the Capitol, in state buildings across the state, and in educational facilities. The University of Wyoming trustees voted in December not to adopt their own concealed carry policy, but the Building Commission, the State Building Commission last week did adopt their own policy. So it remains to be seen how the lawmakers will decide who and where concealed carry firearms are allowed. Many local school districts in Wyoming are discussing their own district-wide policies, but there is a Senate file that is being proposed that would create enhanced concealed carry capabilities in schools for people that meet certain qualifications. And then there is also a bill coming forward that would eliminate sales tax on firearms in the Senate.
So the State Building Commission, basically after Governor Gordon vetoed a bill that would have lifted all gun-free zones throughout the state, he did promise through the State Building Commission, which is made of the state's top 5 elected officials, including himself, to start looking at gun-free zones within state capitol buildings, state-owned buildings. So where they're at right now is they just recently voted to adopt this new firearm policy that would only apply to the Capitol and its underground corridor called the Capitol Extension. But basically, it would allow people to either concealed carry or constitutional carry their firearms within Wyoming statute within the Capitol building, excluding the Hirschler building, which is attached through the corridor. So basically, since they just voted on that last week, what that means is that there's now a 40-day review process submitted to the Legislative Service Office, and it also needs to be reviewed by legislative leadership, also known as Management Council. after that 40-day process, that is the soonest that that policy could go into place. At the same time, there's a working group through the State Building Commission that is looking at lifting gun-free zones in other state-owned buildings. But that one's a little bit more complicated because you have areas such as the Department of Corrections and Highway Patrol that might have their own firearm policies. So they want them to kind of weigh in and see how they feel about that. So on the House side, just today, Representative Jeremy Harrelson filed a bill called House Bill 174, Carrying of Concealed Weapons, age requirement. Basically what this bill does is lower the age for a concealed carry permit from 21 to 18 years old. However, one bill that we are still waiting on that he has announced multiple times that he would file is a gun-free zones, the same one that Gordon vetoed last year. Mm-hmm. Harrelson has mentioned several times that he will be bringing that bill back, but we have yet to see it as of today, whether or not that will be filed for the general session, but he has promised that one is coming. And so he still has some time to file that bill, according to the legislative session schedule, which is posted on the legislature's website. He has until February 3rd. That is the last date to introduce any House bills. On the Senate side, they have until Wednesday, January 29th.
Great. And do either of you have any more topics that you're planning on covering that you want to discuss here?
Yeah, I would just say, so this year I'm starting out covering the House of Representatives. Carrie will be starting out on the Senate. Mm-hmm. Outside of the bills, one thing I'll also be looking at is the Wyoming Freedom Caucus. This is the first year that they will be taking leadership positions in the House of Representatives. In fact, Wyoming is the first state in the country to have a Freedom Caucus majority in a state legislative chamber. So I'm very curious to see how they'll be moving forward. They did announce earlier this year their 5 and dime plan, which is basically their promise to introduce 5 key bills within the first 10 days of the session. And during a Freedom Caucus press conference last week, they mentioned also their 2020 vision, which includes the 5 bills plus 15 others. So they're hoping to introduce a total of 20 bills. They're hoping to pass a total of 20 bills within the first 20 days of the legislative session. These bills include things such as property tax relief. It includes abortion-related bills, restricting reproductive rights here in Wyoming. It includes bills regarding transgender people, banning them from, so like transgender females would be banned from female bathrooms. They would be banned from competing on female sports teams and other quote-unquote private female spaces. So they have a whole slew of bills that they want to get through within the first 20 days. So I'll be keeping up with that, kind of just like tracking their progress, seeing how successful they are in getting these bills passed through. Even if they do get through the House of Representatives, those bills still have to pass through the Senate.
So the Freedom Caucus officially exists inside of the House of Representatives. There isn't a organized Freedom Caucus on the Senate side. However, there are a couple bills that follow along the same policy lines as those in the House. One of those is Senate File 92, Make Carbon Dioxide Great Again, which is sponsored by Senator Steinmetz in the Senate. And then another is Senate File 105, an act to preserve state territorial sovereignty, sponsored by Senators Ide, Larson, McEwen, Pearson, and Smith. So the same ideological discussions will be happening on the Senate side as are happening on the House side.
Mm-hmm. And they're just technically not part of the Freedom Caucus, but similar
ideologies.
Topics. Sure. Great. Thank you, Carrie. And so I know you guys are both busy and need to get back over to the Capitol soon, but before I let you go, I'm just curious if you could explain to the listeners and to me as someone who doesn't cover state government all that much, just the process of how this works. You've discussed a lot of these bills, and basically I guess just in Wyoming, how a bill becomes a law.
The 2025 legislative session is considered a general session, so we will be over at the Capitol for the 37-day schedule. Today, Tuesday, the bills will start to be introduced, and if they get a majority vote of 51%, then they move on to what's called the committee process. So each bill that is introduced on the floor that gets a majority vote gets sent to an appropriate committee for discussion there. It is at the committee level that the public and non-elected officials are able to come and comment and discuss the bill and its impact on Wyoming citizens. After a House bill goes through the House committee, then it is sent over to the Senate to be approved and discussed on the Senate side. Roughly halfway through the session, the Senate files will cross over to the House to be considered there, and the House bills will cross over to the Senate to be considered there, and the committee process starts over again. So for a House bill that was approved on the House floor and in House committee, it will have to go over to the Senate and be approved by Senate committees and then by the Senate as a whole. At that point, the bill will go through a reconciliation process to make sure that the House and the Senate both agree on the changes, and then it will head to the governor's desk for the governor's signature veto or line item vetoes on specific parts of the bill. All of this will be happening before the session ends on March 6th.
Well, great. Thank you for that. I appreciate you, Carrie and Hannah, for joining me on the podcast this week. I know you both only learned about this about an hour ago that you're going to be chatting with me today, but I really appreciate it. And to our listeners, be sure to follow along in print and online over the next around 2 months, I suppose, for stories coming out of the state capitol. But that's all for this week from The Perch at the Wyoming Tribune Eagle, and be sure to tune back in next week.